Hi everybody, this is week 1, lesson 2. So yesterday we were talking about trying to kind of remind you of where we were and how it all links together. Today is the start of me actually going through the 17 different possible reasons that there could be low levels of development in sub-Saharan Africa, and beginning to think about your opinion on which ones you think, oh yeah, that definitely probably has a part to play, or whether you think, I actually think that's quite a minor problem and other things are much more important. This week's YouTube videos will all be about physical geography. So if you want to remind yourself of the framework, page 12 of your module booklet is always your best place to go back to. But today we're going to be starting on page 17. Okay, so page 17, and that's what we're going to talk our way through today. So physical geography is sort of divided really into two sections, and the thing about that is today, because I don't know if I said yesterday, I've realised now I've started doing this that I have to limit my videos to 15 minutes. So I'm going to do one video on number 1, and then the second one might actually take me a couple of videos, but we'll see. That's what we're going to work through this week. Okay, so there is a hyperlink on this PowerPoint, and this PowerPoint will be attached to an email that I send to you. You have hopefully already seen that video clip. It's the $100 race. If you weren't in the lesson or it doesn't ring any bells, then obviously open that hyperlink please and have a watch. What we're saying about physical geography is essentially that physical geography can give some countries a bit of a head start because they have a coastline or an easier climate, or they don't tend to experience hurricanes, or they have more natural resources. So that's why the $100 race is quite a good analogy, because it's the idea that some countries, as I said, have a head start because of their physical geography. Today we are talking about resources. So the definition of a resource is anything that is useful, which is a really, really broad definition, isn't it? But the second bullet point is probably the important one. If you were in charge of a country, you want resources because you can either use those resources to develop your country, so you can burn the coal to power your factories, or you can use the bauxite to make aluminium, etc., etc. But the other brilliant thing about resources is you can sell them to other countries, and then you can use that money to develop your country. So that's the fundamental idea. And what you would probably expect, quite rightly, is that a country with more resources should be more developed than a country with fewer resources. That's the basic principle, okay? But what we then have to think is, well, actually not all countries have an equal amount of resources, which is where the whole $100 race and head start thing comes from. Geologists, we don't have to know too much about this in geography, but essentially whether or not you have oil, crude oil, is down to geological chance. When we were dividing up who lived where and who owned what on the planet, we didn't really know about oil. Oil was actually discovered by accident. I can absolutely assure you that if we knew where the world's oil was when we were dividing countries up, I think we would own very different parts of the planet. Notice not a huge amount of crude oil in Africa. Diamonds, however, Africa is kind of winning that particular race. So there are definitely some natural resources. Again, pure geological chance. If you have it, if you don't. This is gold. Again, Africa's doing pretty well. This is a sort of summative map of things. It's not true to say then that the continent of Africa doesn't have natural resources. That's not true, but you can very clearly see from this map that some countries have more than others. And that's the first question, really. Because natural resources give you an advantage, do you think that that has a massive impact on a country's level of development. So, something for you to ponder. But this is the sticking point. I then need to introduce you to something called the resource curse, which is where it all tends to go wrong in sub-Saharan Africa. So the resource curse is explained on page 17, and essentially what the resource curse goes through, and all of this is written on page 17 for you. The natural resource curse, I'm reading from page 17, is a phenomenon where natural resource endowed countries experience worse economic and political outcomes than countries with no natural resources, which is the complete opposite, let's be honest, of what you would expect. And the bullet points that are on page 17 and in front of you right now explain basically why that is. You don't need to remember all of them, you just need to know what the resource curse is and be able to explain it in your own words. Political conflict. So if you've got resources, people will generally kind of fight to be in charge of them, because whoever is in charge of the resources is going to make the money. So in some countries, resources lead to conflict, and that's definitely true in sub-Saharan Africa. The second point is kind of linked to that. If you have a corrupt politician, what they may well do is try to make themselves rich from the resources rather than make the country rich. And we'll be talking in this module quite a lot about corruption. It is a real issue in some sub-Saharan African countries. Third bullet point we've talked about quite a lot, inequality. Inequality is a topic that you need to know for year 1 and year 2, and it's this gap between the haves and the have-nots. What can happen in many countries, it has to be said, not just African ones, the money made by the resources will go to a very small section of the society. The government might not be able to manage resources. They are probably quite poor. They may have limited resources. And again, there's a hyperlink there that you should already have seen in class, possibly on a couple of occasions, but if you haven't, open it and have a look. It's the video clip about why Sierra Leone cannot stop Chinese trawlers nicking their fish. They've got one patrol boat. It can only go out once a month because they don't have enough money to do it more frequently. And consequently, because of that lack of resources, money and time, they cannot stop other countries stealing their fish. It just proves that weak government point. And also, the resource curse can lead to environmental pollution. Getting resources out of the ground, getting your hands on resources usually has a negative impact on the environment, and we will pick up on that right towards the end of the module. So don't worry too much about that one right now. So that's a bit weird, isn't it? Actually, having resources might be a negative, which is weird. Just to prove a couple of points, you'll obviously have longer to look at this if you open the PowerPoint for yourself, but you can see large numbers of resource-related conflict, and you can see pretty clearly that they are increasing. There's the location of some of them, so they are generally sub-Saharan. We, out of our 5 countries, are going to focus on Botswana and Sierra Leone for this. And the reason I've chosen those 2 countries is because they both have diamonds, so there's a direct comparability between the 2 of them. And as I've put, as you will know from your research, please make sure you're doing your research, folks, Botswana is doing pretty well and Sierra Leone isn't. So they've both got the same resource, but they've got a fundamental different level of development, which is kind of the reason I've chosen them. And what that means, if you read the 3rd bullet point, it clearly isn't quite so simple to say Botswana's doing better because it's got diamonds, Sierra Leone's not doing very well because they haven't got resources, because that is fundamentally not true. And we will keep coming back to this idea that I tried to get across to you in class last week. These problems are inextricably interlinked. It's like a knotted shoelace that you just can't undo. It's not really quite so simple as to say it's all the fault of this one problem, because that one problem will be linked to about 10 other problems. So Botswana, as you can see, GDP is doing really very well, particularly if you compare it to the sub-Saharan African average. And these are the key points, really. And there are a couple of hyperlinks that you can have a look at just to prove this to yourself. One of the things that I do need to get across to you, though, is a fundamental difference about where the diamonds are. So in Botswana, the diamonds are deep underground. So when you mine them, you have a mine shaft which you can put a fence around, you can put police around it, you can really, really monitor that very effectively. Okay, so in Botswana, the diamonds are deep underground and they have to be mined using proper equipment and proper mine shafts and all that kind of stuff. In Sierra Leone, I'll just get slightly ahead of myself, diamonds are just found on the ground, generally in riverbeds and riverbanks. They're exposed by river erosion, which means you can't control them. Anybody potentially in Sierra Leone can just go along and pick up a diamond. And that is quite an important difference between why Botswana's done quite well and Sierra Leone hasn't. So there's a few key points here. The Botswanian, I think that's the word, the Botswanian government joint owns the diamond mining company with a British company called De Beers. They've got a really good government, they're the least corrupt, they do all the right stuff. Maybe it's not just a question of whether you have resources, maybe it's a question of how well you manage them. And Botswana is an excellent example of managing resources effectively. Okay, so when you go through this on the PowerPoint, open those websites, have a look. You don't need loads of detail. It's about mulling this over and trying to come up with your own opinions. Do you think that diamonds have made Botswana rich, or is it more to do with how they've managed that? Sierra Leone, the diamonds tend to lead to fighting. There's a movie that I recommended you watch called Blood Diamond with Leonardo DiCaprio in it, which would get this across to you quite well. So what they do, because the diamonds can be sort of picked up by anybody, it leads to fighting, it leads to lots of amputation, as you can unfortunately see in front of you. The idea being if people don't have hands, then they're not able to pick the diamonds up. This conflict then has the completely opposite effect on a country that development does. Development, your country should gradually get better and better and better. Conflict means your country gets worse and worse and worse. So this is a real problem. Okay, so they're your two countries to sort of compare. It's worth just having a teeny bit of knowledge about the Democratic Republic of the Congo here, purely because if you simply looked at the natural resources that they had, they really should be the richest and most developed country in Africa, in the whole of Africa. They have a wealth of natural resources. And as part of your research, if you could just name drop a couple, that would be brilliant. It's worth saying that modern life, as in your smartphone and technology and stuff, really wouldn't happen without some of the resources found in the DRC. What DR Congo really proves, awfully, terribly, is it's not about the fact you've got resources, it's how you manage them. It takes what I've just said about Sierra Leone and kind of really shoves it in your face, because it's just so kind of horrible, really. And I think just being able to refer to the fact that the resource curse is the most extreme in DR Congo is probably worth you being able to explain. Okay, so that's the idea. You've got loads of hyperlinks to just have a brief look at and to go over. You know that you can email me questions if needs be. And then tomorrow we'll move on to talking about climate and other things. Okay, so it's pages 17, 18 of your module booklet. And email for questions. Thanks, folks.